sit down to discuss these difficult issues. Which is why so many times it's hard to get through to the issue, because parts of our story come in and start to take place, start to be activated, and then sometimes negotiations break down. So again, I'm talking again about this psychological dimension I keep bringing up. Yes?
It triggered, I watched a couple of weeks ago Slumdog Millionaires.
Somewhat?
Slumdog Millionaire.
Oh, yes.
And it's exactly that story that everybody's watching this guy working on winning, who wants to be the richest. And yet his stories of how he knew those facts are just horrendous.
Thank you. That's a great example.
A really touching story.
Right. And every one of those stories helped him formulate the answer.
Yeah, so for those people who don't know, a story about, it's a Indian film about a man who lives in the slums of India, and through his experiences of trying to lift himself out of his life story, he ends up being on a game show. Who wants to be the richest, or something like that. Who wants to be a billionaire? And so he is competing against this man, and that he has these flashbacks at every single question, how he knows every single question, and they are stories of his life that are gut-wrenching, horrific stories, but they, so I think that's...
Has everybody seen that film? Slumdog Millionaire. Oh, yeah. Thank you. Great example. Great example. So, how do I, or how have, or where have I felt uprooted? How can I branch out? How might, my organization need to branch out? How might I need to branch out? Where can I lay down new roots? Or do I need to lay down new roots? This place isn't working for me anymore. This relationship isn't working for me anymore. So where do I need to lay down new roots? So my question then for you, and again to share with others or to journal it, what new shoots are growing in your psyche? What new shoots are growing in your psyche? Matter of fact, the idea or the imagery here is you're making new neural connections. My neurons are almost on overload from this week. New connections, new, colleagues in a collegial sense, but, by the end of the session, these people are going to be friends. So where are you making new connections? Maybe back home in your life, in your work, in your family, in your relationships. So again, this is a brain thing, but there's new neurons that are forming with these new branchings out. Anything over this week anyone wants to share, a new connection that feels like, a new branching out for you? Your brain did. It's only halfway there, we're only halfway through. Anybody? Okay, but you're working with that then? You've written that down, you work with that? Yeah? Thanks for sharing, yeah.
Well, because I'm with Laurie in a roundtable, that's why I'm here, to open my mind to a different approach to thinking about our relationships.
Yeah. Thank you, Mindy. Okay, so I want to show the video. This is Ian McGilchrist on the divided brain, a little bit of the neurosciences I'm talking about, very, very interesting thinking that goes with this ecopsychological component.
The division of the brain is something neuroscientists don't talk about anymore. It enjoyed a sort of popularity in the 60s and 70s after the first split brain operations, and it led to a sort of popularization which has since been proved to be entirely false. It's not true that one part of the brain does reason and the other does emotion. both are profoundly involved in both. It's not true that language resides only in the left hemisphere. It does its important aspects in the right. It's not true that visual imagery is only in the right hemisphere. Lots of it is in the left. And so in a sort of fit of despair, people have given up talking about it. But the problem won't really go away, because this organ, which is all about making connection, is profoundly divided. It's there inside all of us, and it's got more divided over the course of human evolution. So that the ratio of the corpus callosum to the volume of the hemispheres has got smaller over evolution. And the plot thickens when you realise that one of the main, if not the main, function of the corpus callosum is in fact to inhibit the other hemisphere. So something very important is going on here about keeping things apart from one another. And not only that, the brain is profoundly asymmetric. It's broader at the back on the left and broader on the right at the front, and slightly juts forward and backward. And it's as though somebody got hold of the brain from underneath and given it a sort of sharp twist clockwise. What is all that about? If one just needed more brain space, one would do it symmetrically. The skull is symmetrical. The box in which all this is contained is symmetrical. Why go to trouble to expand some bits of one hemisphere and some bits of another, unless they were doing rather different things? What are they doing? Well, it's not just we who have these divided brains. Birds and animals have them as well. I think the simplest way to think of it is to imagine a bird trying to feed on a seed against the background of brittle pebbles. It's got to focus very narrowly and clearly on that little seed and be able to pick it out against that background. But it's also, if it's going to stay alive, it's got to actually keep a quite different kind of attention open. It's got to be on the lookout for predators or for friends, not specifics, but for whatever else is going on. It seems that birds and animals quite reliably use their left hemisphere for this narrow focused attention to something it already knows is of importance to it. And they keep their right hemisphere vigilant broadly for whatever might be without any commitment as to what that might be. And they also use their right hemispheres for making connections with the world, so that they approach their mates and bond with their mates more using the right hemisphere. But then you come to the humans, and it's true that actually in humans too, this kind of attention is one of the big differences. The right hemisphere gives sustained, broad, open, vigilance, alertness, where the left hemisphere gives narrow, sharply focused attention to detail. And people who lose their right hemispheres have a pathological narrowing of the window of attention. But humans are different. The big thing about humans is their frontal lobes. And the purpose of that part of the brain? To inhibit the rest of the brain, to stop the immediate happening. So standing back in time and space from the immediacy of experience. And that enables us to do two things. It enables us to do what neuroscientists are always telling us we're very good at, which is outwitting the other party, being Machiavellian. And that's interesting to me, because that's absolutely right. We can read other people's minds and intentions, and if we so want to, we can deceive them. But the bit that's always curiously missed out here is that it also enables us to empathise for the first time, because there's a sort of necessary distance from the world. If you're right up against it, you just bite. But if you can stand back and see that other individual is an individual like me, who might have interests and values and feelings like mine, then you can make a bond. There's a sort of necessary distance, as there is in reading. Too close, you can't see anything. Too far, you can't read. So the distance from the world that is provided is profoundly creative of all that is human, both the Machiavellian and the Erasmian. Now, to do the Machiavellian stuff, to manipulate the world, which is very important, we need to be able to interact with the world and use it for our benefit. Food is the starting point, but we also, with our left hemispheres, grasp using our right hand things and make tools. We also use that part of language to grasp things, as we say. It pins them down. So when we already know something's important and we want to be precise about it, we use our left hemispheres in that way. And to do that, we need a simplified version of reality. It's no good if you're fighting a campaign, having all the information on all the plant species that grow in the terrain of battle. What you need is to know the specifics of where certain things are that matter to you, and so you have a map and you have little flags. It's not reality, but it works better. The newness of the right hemisphere makes it a devil's advocate. It's always on the lookout for things that might be different from our expectations. It sees things in context. It understands implicit meaning, metaphor, body language, emotional expression of the face. It deals with an embodied world, in which we stand embodied in relation to a world that is concrete. It understands individuals, not just categories. It actually has a disposition for the living rather than the mechanical. And this is so marked that even in the left-hander who is actually using their right hemisphere in daily life to manipulate tools with their left hand, it is their left hemisphere, not their right hemisphere, in which tools and machines are coded. So this is very interesting. And it changes the view of the body. The body becomes an assemblage of parts of the left hemisphere. If I had to sum it all up, I would get away from all those things that we used to say, reason and imagination. Let me make it very clear. For imagination, you need both hemispheres. Let me make it very clear, for reason you need both hemispheres. So if I had to sum it up, I'd say the world of the left hemisphere, dependent on delimited language and abstraction, yields clarity and power to manipulate things that are known, fixed, static, isolated, decontextualized, explicit, general in nature, but ultimately lifeless. The right hemisphere, by contrast, yields a world of individual, changing, evolving, interconnected, implicit, incarnate, living beings within the context of the lived world, but in the nature of things never fully graspable, never perfectly known. And to this world it exists in a certain relationship. The knowledge is mediated by the left hemisphere is, however, within a closed system. It has the advantage of perfection, but the perfection is bought ultimately at the price of emptiness. There's a problem here about the nature of the two worlds. They offer us two versions of the world, and obviously we combine them in different ways all the time. We need to rely on certain things to manipulate the world, but for a broad understanding of it, we need to use knowledge that comes from the right hemisphere. And it's my suggestion to you that in the history of Western culture, things started in the 6th century BC in the Augustan era and in the 15th, 16th century in Europe, with a wonderful balancing of these hemispheres, but in each case it drifted further to the left hemisphere's point of view. Nowadays we live in a world which is paradoxical. We pursue happiness and it leads to resentment, and it leads to unhappiness, and it leads in fact to an explosion of mental illness. We pursue freedom, but we now live in a world which is more monitored by CCTV cameras, and in which our daily lives are more subjected to what the top bill called a network of small complicated rules that cover the surface of life and strangle freedom. More information, we have it in spades, but we get less and less able to use it, to understand it, to be wise. There's a paradoxical relationship, as I know as a psychiatrist, between adversity and fulfillment, between restraint and freedom, between the knowledge of the past and wisdom about the whole. A machine model again that is supposed to answer everything, but it doesn't. Think about this. Even rationality is grounded in a leap of intuition. There is no way you can rationally prove that rationality is a good way to look at the world. We intuit it is very helpful. And this is not new. At the other end of the process, rationality, we know from Gödel's theorem, we know from what Pascal was saying hundreds of years before Gödel, that the end point of rationality is to demonstrate the limits to rationality. In our modern world, we've developed something that looks awfully like the left hemisphere's world. We prioritize the virtual over the real. The technical becomes important. Bureaucracy flourishes. The picture, however, is fragmented. There's a loss of uniqueness. The how has become subsumed in what. And the need for control leads to a paranoia in society that we need to govern and control everything. Why this shift? I think there are three reasons. One is the left hemisphere's talk is very convincing because it shaved everything that it doesn't find fits with its model off and cut it out. So this particular model is entirely self-consistent, largely because it's made itself so. I also call the left hemisphere the Berlusconi of the brain. Because it controls the media. It's the one with which it's very vocal on its own behalf. The right hemisphere doesn't have a voice, and it can't construct these same arguments. And I also think, rather more importantly, importantly, there's a sort of hall of mirrors effect. The more we get trapped into this, the more we undercut and ionize things that might have led us out of it. And we just get reflected back into more of what we know about what we know about what we know. And I just want to make it clear, I'm not against whatever it is the left hemisphere has to offer. Nobody could be more passionate in an age in which we neglect reason and we neglect careful use of language. Nobody could be more passionate than myself about language and about reason. It's just that I'm even more passionate about the right hemisphere and the need to return what that knows to a broader context. It turned out that Einstein's thinking somehow presaged this thing about the structure of the brain. He said, the intuitive mind is a sacred gift, and the rational mind is a faithful servant. We have created a society that honors the servant, but has forgotten the gift.
Okay, there's a lot in that video, and I'm not going to even attempt to unpack it. That's not really what we're doing today. But the idea that I hope that you gleaned from that is that diversity, we need both parts of the brain. We need to activate, our reasoning, thinking, logos as much as we need our empathic sense of humanities, great literature, great music, great art, great conversation type of experiences. So we need both parts of the brain to be able to cultivate diversity. And of course, you probably also realize from this that in our historical teaching of left brain, right brain, we have also fallen into those categories. Men were left brain, women right brain. So of course, we weren't able to articulate deep thoughts or constructive thoughts or theoretical findings. So we think we live in the 21st century and this is not a part of our world, but this kind of thinking is still a part of our world in places. It's still a part of our world even in the United States, which of course I'm not saying is the most educated country in the world, because it's not. But the idea is that these prejudices are still operating in our culture. So if we go back to our tree image then in diversity, and this idea of branching out, and we asked some questions about this earlier, we can also, if you ask where can I branch out, where can I diversify, where can I cultivate more diversity, we can also ask the question of what are the branches that need pruning in my life? What are the branches we need to prune our trees so they continue to flourish and bear fruit and do the things that they do? Pruning always helps that. Nature prunes them, itself with storms and high winds and those kinds of things. But think about this metaphorically. What are the branches in my life, in my tree, that need pruning? That this could be maybe what behaviors no longer serving you, but you still exhibit. It could also mean, you're doing 2 or 3 jobs, and where can you prune down your workload? Those kinds of things. So I want you to work with that for a few minutes too. You might want to share that, but just to give you some more images to work with, maybe there's a part of your job that's boring, and actually not really that necessary. So how can you prune that out so that you can channel your energy to do other things? So again, I hope you start to see these things are connected too. It's not just energy, it's not just diversity, it's not just waste. These are all going through, are intricately connected with each other. What about dead friendships? What about a dead relationship that needs pruning? What about a parasitic relationship? Again, work time. You're a workaholic, maybe. I tend to do that. I have to really prune my work time. The budget needs pruning, those kinds of things. So what we're looking at is where can we prune down places that is inhibiting our ability to diversify and misusing or mischanneling our energy, so that we can restore a sense of energy to places that can actually grow and bud and flourish. In pruning or cutting off dead branches, we're releasing dead cells, in a sense, from that tree. Psychologically, when we prune, we can release old resentments, old hurts, jealousy, envy, tribal hatred, cultural hatred, family feuds, even curses. So we prune these old narratives that hold these things in place. Family feuds is, if I think about the southern part, or the southern east, southern midwestern part of the United States, where there's a historical sense of family feuding there. And for no other reason, because the